A discovery that changes everything. Kevin Parker, a 14-year-old boy from the bustling streets of Springfield, was no stranger to challenges. Life hadn't been easy since his father passed away 3 years ago, leaving Kevin and his mother to navigate a world filled with struggles. Yet, despite their hardships, Kevin had grown into a resourceful and kind-hearted young man. His days were a delicate balance of school, part-time work, and helping his mother with household chores. One sunny afternoon, as Kevin was walking home from school, his sharp eyes caught something unusual on the pavement. It was a black leather wallet, slightly worn, resting near the curb of an empty street. Kevin paused, his instincts urging him to pick it up. He glanced around, but there wasn't a soul in sight. Carefully, he bent down, retrieving the wallet and examining it under the bright sunlight. The wallet was heavier than expected. Kevin hesitated for a moment, his thoughts racing. Could someone be looking for this right now? Should I open it? He debated silently before curiosity got the better of him. Slowly, he unzipped the wallet and peeked inside. What he found made his eyes widen. Neatly folded bills, more than Kevin had ever seen in one place, filled the main compartment. There were at least 5 crisp $100 notes, along with a few smaller bills. Tucked beside the money were several credit cards and a faded photograph of a young woman with striking green eyes and auburn hair. The image seemed old, almost vintage, and Kevin couldn't help but wonder who she was. Finally, his eyes landed on a driver's license. Harold Whitmore, Kevin read aloud, his voice echoing in the empty street. The address listed wasn't far from where he stood, just a few blocks away, in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Springfield. Kevin recognized the name. Harold Whitmore was a reclusive old man who lived in an enormous mansion on Willow Avenue. Rumors swirled about him. Some said he was a miserly millionaire, while others described him as a lonely widower who rarely left his home. Kevin's mind raced as he weighed his options. The money in the wallet could solve a lot of his family's problems. His mother worked long hours at a diner, barely making enough to cover their rent and bills. Kevin had been saving every penny from his part-time job as a grocery store delivery boy, hoping to contribute to their expenses and maybe, just maybe, buy himself a second-hand bicycle for his school commute. This money could change everything. But then his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Kevin, no matter how tough life gets, always choose the path of honesty. It's the only way you'll truly hold your head high. Kevin knew what he had to do. With a determined nod, he zipped the wallet shut and tucked it into his backpack. He'd return it to its rightful owner, no matter what. As Kevin continued his walk home, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The weight of the wallet seemed heavier now, not because of its contents, but because of the responsibility it carried. Kevin couldn't help but wonder about Mr. Whitmore. What kind of man was he? Would he even care that someone had gone out of their way to return his wallet? Kevin shook his head, dismissing his doubts. It didn't matter. Doing the right thing wasn't about the other person's reaction. It was about staying true to oneself. When Kevin finally reached his small, modest home, he was greeted by the smell of his mother's cooking. The aroma of chicken stew wafted through the air, instantly making his stomach growl. "Hi, Mom," he called out, dropping his backpack by the door. "Hey, sweetie," Mrs. Parker replied from the kitchen. Her voice was warm but tinged with exhaustion. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. How was school?" "Good," Kevin answered automatically, though his mind was elsewhere. He debated whether to tell his mother about the wallet, but decided to wait until he'd returned it. He didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. After dinner, Kevin sat at the small kitchen table, pulling out the wallet once again. He examined the contents more carefully this time, making sure nothing was missing. Alongside the money, credit cards, and photograph, there was a handwritten note tucked into one of the smaller compartments. The paper was yellowed with age and bore the faint scent of cologne. Kevin unfolded it carefully. The note read, "My dearest Harold, you are the light of my life. Love always, Margaret." Kevin's chest tightened. This wasn't just a wallet. It was a piece of someone's life, a treasure trove of memories and significance. He resolved to return it first thing the next day, no matter how intimidating the prospect of meeting Mr. Whitmore might be. That night, Kevin lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts of the wallet and its owner filled his mind. He imagined the old man's reaction. Would he be grateful? Suspicious? Kevin couldn't be sure. All he knew was that he couldn't let his fears stop him from doing the right thing. As the first light of dawn seeped through his bedroom window, Kevin was already up and dressed. He slipped the wallet into his backpack, grabbed a quick breakfast, and set off towards Willow Avenue. His heart pounded with anticipation as he walked through the quiet, upscale neighborhood. The houses here were nothing like the cramped apartments on his side of town. They were grand and imposing, each one more lavish than the last. When Kevin finally reached the Whitmore residence, he stopped in his tracks. The mansion was even more intimidating in person, with tall iron gates and a sprawling lawn that looked like it hadn't been tended to in years. Ivy crept up the brick walls, and several windows were shuttered, giving the house a lonely, abandoned feel. Kevin took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. He reached for the intercom button by the gate and pressed it. A sharp buzz echoed through the air, followed by a long silence. Kevin shifted nervously, wondering if anyone would answer. Just as he was about to press the button again, a crackly voice came through the speaker. "Yes. Who is it?" The voice was deep and gravelly, with an edge of suspicion. Hi, my name's Kevin Parker," he stammered, his palms sweaty. I found something that belongs to you. A wallet." There was a pause, followed by a loud click. The gates creaked open slowly, revealing a stone path that led to the front door. Kevin hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. His heart pounded as he made his way up the path, the mansion looming larger with each step. When he reached the massive wooden door, it swung open before he could knock. Standing in the doorway was a tall, elderly man with a stern expression. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, scanned Kevin from head to toe. Despite his intimidating presence, there was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. "You said you found my wallet?" Mr. Whitmore asked, his voice cautious but not unkind. Kevin nodded, pulling the wallet from his backpack and holding it out with both hands. "Yes, sir. I found it on the sidewalk yesterday and thought you might want it back." Mr. Whitmore took the wallet, his expression unreadable as he opened it and checked its contents. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, to Kevin's surprise, the old man's face softened. "Thank you," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice quieter now. "You've done a good thing, young man." Kevin felt a wave of relief wash over him. He nodded, ready to turn and leave, but Mr. Whitmore's next words stopped him in his tracks. "Wait, I'd like to talk to you for a moment." The unexpected invitation. Kevin froze at the doorway, unsure how to respond. Mr. Whitmore's piercing blue eyes locked onto his, but there was no hostility in them, just curiosity and perhaps something deeper, something resembling gratitude. The boy shifted nervously on his feet, gripping the straps of his backpack. "Come inside," Mr. Whitmore said, stepping back and gesturing toward the dark interior of the mansion. His voice, though still gruff, carried a softer undertone now. "It's the least I can do after what you've done." Kevin hesitated, glancing back at the open gates as if weighing the idea of making a run for it. But his mother's voice echoed in his head. "Be polite, Kevin. Always respect your elders." Taking a deep breath, he stepped across the threshold, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished marble floor. The inside of the house was just as grand as its exterior, but it had an air of neglect. Dust coated the elegant furniture, and heavy drapes blocked most of the sunlight, casting the space in muted shadows. A massive chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dull and cobwebbed. Kevin felt small and out of place, like a smudge on an otherwise pristine painting. "This way," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice cutting through Kevin's thoughts. The old man led him down a hallway lined with faded portraits, their subjects staring down at Kevin with expressions that seemed both regal and stern. The boy's gaze lingered on one particular painting, a young woman with auburn hair and green eyes, her smile warm and inviting. Kevin recognized her immediately from the photograph in the wallet. "That's Margaret," Mr. Whitmore said abruptly, noticing Kevin's interest. His tone softened as he added, "My late wife." Kevin nodded, unsure what to say. The hallway opened into a grand study, its walls lined with towering bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. In the center of the room was a large desk, its surface cluttered with papers, a tarnished globe, and an antique clock. Mr. Whitmore gestured for Kevin to sit in one of the armchairs near the desk. "Would you like something to drink? Water? Juice?" the old man asked, surprising Kevin with his hospitality. "No, thank you, sir," Kevin replied, his voice quiet but steady. He sat down, feeling the soft, worn leather of the armchair envelop him. Mr. Whitmore lowered himself into the chair opposite Kevin, placing the wallet on the desk between them. He studied the boy for a moment, his gaze intense but not unkind. "You're a good kid," he said finally. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did. They'd have taken the money and tossed the wallet." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "It just didn't feel right, sir," he said honestly. "I thought about keeping it for a moment. But my mom always says honesty is the most important thing. She'd have been disappointed if I didn't return it." Mr. Whitmore's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Your mother raised you well," he said. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You know, that wallet isn't just a wallet to me. It holds memories of Margaret, notes, pictures, little things that remind me of her. Losing it felt like losing her all over again." Kevin swallowed hard, his heart aching for the old man. "I'm glad I could get it back to you, Mr. Whitmore," he said. "I didn't know it meant so much." The old man nodded, his eyes distant as he stared at the wallet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, seemingly snapping out of his reverie, Mr. Whitmore leaned forward and rested his hands on the desk. "I don't get many visitors," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "I've kept to myself ever since Margaret passed. This house, this life, it feels empty without her." Kevin didn't know how to respond, but he felt a pang of sympathy for the man. Despite the grandeur of his surroundings, Mr. Whitmore seemed lonely, isolated in a way that no amount of wealth could fix. "You must be wondering why I asked you to stay," Mr. Whitmore continued, his tone growing serious. "It's not just to thank you, though I am grateful. It's because I see something in you, Kevin. Integrity, courage, qualities that are rare these days." Kevin blinked, taken aback by the compliment. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Whitmore stood and walked to one of the bookshelves, pulling down a small ornate box. He carried it back to the desk and placed it in front of Kevin. The box was intricately carved with swirling patterns, its wood polished to a deep sheen. "Open it," Mr. Whitmore said, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. Kevin hesitated, then reached out and lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of old coins, each one gleaming as if freshly minted. Kevin's eyes widened as he realized they weren't just ordinary coins. They were gold, and they looked valuable. "These were part of a collection, Margaret, and I started when we were young," Mr. Whitmore explained. "We traveled all over the world, collecting coins and memories. I've been holding on to them, unsure of what to do with them." Kevin stared at the coins, his mind racing. Why was Mr. Whitmore showing him this? "I want you to have them," the old man said, his voice firm. Kevin's head snapped up. "What? No, I can't." "You can, and you will," Mr. Whitmore interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Consider it a reward for your honesty. You've earned it." Kevin shook his head, his hands trembling. "Sir, this is too much. I can't take something so valuable." Mr. Whitmore leaned forward, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Listen to me, Kevin. This isn't just about the coins. It's about giving you a chance, an opportunity to build a better future. I don't have anyone else to pass these things on to, and I'd rather they go to someone who deserves them than gather dust in this house." Tears pricked Kevin's eyes as he struggled to find the right words. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," he managed to say, his voice choked with emotion. "I'll make sure these coins are used for something good. I promise." The old man nodded, his expression softening. "I believe you, Kevin. You've already proven yourself to be trustworthy." As Kevin carefully closed the box, he felt a newfound sense of responsibility settle over him. This wasn't just a gift. It was a sign of faith, a reminder that doing the right thing could lead to unexpected rewards. Mr. Whitmore escorted Kevin to the door, his demeanor lighter now. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to come by," he said. "You're always welcome here." Kevin smiled, his heart full. "Thank you, sir. I won't forget this." As he stepped out into the crisp morning air, Kevin felt like a new person. The box of coins in his backpack was more than just a treasure. It was a symbol of the power of honesty and the kindness that could bridge even the widest gaps between people. Little did Kevin know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. A ripple effect of kindness. The box of coins weighed heavily in Kevin's backpack as he made his way home. But it wasn't the weight of gold that he felt. It was the weight of responsibility, the kind that comes with trust. Mr. Whitmore's gift wasn't just valuable, it was transformative. The old man had seen something in Kevin, something even Kevin wasn't sure he fully understood. The sun was high in the sky by the time Kevin reached his neighborhood. The familiar sights of peeling paint, cracked sidewalks, and kids playing in the street grounded him. His modest house, with its slightly crooked shutters, came into view. Mrs. Parker was outside, hanging freshly washed clothes on the line. She turned, spotting Kevin, and her face lit up with a smile. "You're back early," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Her smile faded as she noticed his pensive expression. "Everything okay, sweetie?" Kevin nodded, his mind still reeling from the morning's events. He dropped his backpack carefully onto the kitchen table and opened it, pulling out the ornate wooden box. Mrs. Parker's eyes widened as he placed it in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Kevin sat down across from her and began to recount everything, finding the wallet, meeting Mr. Whitmore, and the extraordinary gesture the old man had made. Mrs. Parker listened intently, her eyes misting as Kevin described Mr. Whitmore's loneliness and how much the wallet had meant to him. When Kevin finished, his mother opened the box and gasped at the sight of the coins. She ran her fingers gently over the gold, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "Kevin, this is incredible," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you know what this could mean for us? For your future?" Kevin nodded. "I know, Mom. But it's more than that. Mr. Whitmore didn't just give me these coins. He trusted me. I don't want to let him down." Mrs. Parker smiled, her pride in her son shining through. "You've already made me proud, Kevin. And it sounds like you've made a real impression on Mr. Whitmore, too." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them marveling at how a simple act of honesty had led to something so profound. Finally, Mrs. Parker closed the box and placed it gently back on the table. "So what's the plan?" she asked, her tone practical. "Are we going to sell these? Save them for later? What do you think?" Kevin thought for a moment. "I think we should save most of them," he said slowly. "But maybe we could sell one or two. We could use the money for some of the bills, and maybe even for me to go on the school trip." Mrs. Parker's eyes softened. "You've been working so hard for that trip," she said. "I think it's a wonderful idea." Kevin smiled, relief washing over him. He had been saving for months, delivering groceries in all kinds of weather, just to afford the trip to the state capital. Knowing he could finally go was like a weight being lifted off his shoulders. The next day, Kevin and his mother visited a local appraiser to evaluate the coins. The man, a portly figure with round glasses perched on his nose, examined the coins with great care. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up, his expression serious. "These coins are quite rare," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "They're from various countries and time periods, but they're all in excellent condition. If you were to sell one or two, you could easily fetch a few $1,000s each." Kevin and his mother exchanged stunned looks. Thousands of dollars. It was more money than either of them had ever dreamed of having. "Thank you," Mrs. Parker said, her voice steady despite her astonishment. "We'll think about it." As they walked home, Kevin felt a mix of emotions. The coins could provide immediate relief for their financial struggles, but he also wanted to honor Mr. Whitmore's gift by using it wisely. Later that afternoon, as Kevin sat on the porch, his thoughts returned to Mr. Whitmore. The man had seemed so lonely, so cut off from the world. Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that he owed Mr. Whitmore more than gratitude. He owed him a connection. That thought stayed with Kevin, and the following Saturday, he decided to visit the old man again. This time, he wasn't bringing anything back. He was bringing himself. Kevin arrived at the Whitmore mansion in the early afternoon. The gates creaked open as they had before, and the long walk to the door felt less intimidating now. He knocked, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal Mr. Whitmore, his piercing blue eyes widening in surprise. "Kevin," the old man said, his voice warmer than before. "What brings you back?" Kevin shifted nervously. I wanted to check on you, Mr. Whitmore. See how you're doing." The old man's expression softened, and he stepped aside, motioning for Kevin to enter. "Come in," he said. "It's not often I get visitors." They sat in the study again, and this time, the atmosphere was lighter. Mr. Whitmore asked Kevin about school, his interests, and his family. Kevin, in turn, learned more about Mr. Whitmore's life, his years as a businessman, his travels with Margaret, and the deep love they had shared. "She was the heart of this house," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice heavy with emotion. "When she passed, it felt like the light went out." Kevin nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "She'd be proud of you, Mr. Whitmore," he said earnestly. "You've done so much to keep her memory alive." The old man smiled faintly. "And she'd be proud of you too, Kevin. You remind me of the kind of person she always believed the world needed more of. Kind, honest, and brave." Their conversation lasted for hours, and by the time Kevin left, the bond between them felt stronger. As he walked home, he realized that his decision to return the wallet had created something far greater than he could have imagined. A connection that bridged generations and brought meaning to both their lives. In the weeks that followed, Kevin continued to visit Mr. Whitmore, often bringing small gifts like homemade cookies from his mother or a book he thought the old man might enjoy. Each visit seemed to brighten Mr. Whitmore's spirits, and Kevin found himself looking forward to their conversations. Word of Kevin's kindness began to spread through the neighborhood. People who had once dismissed the reclusive Mr. Whitmore started to see him in a new light, thanks to Kevin's influence. Neighbors began waving hello as they passed the mansion, and a few even dropped by to check on the old man. The ripple effect of Kevin's honesty and kindness was undeniable. What had started as a simple act of returning a wallet had grown into something extraordinary, a story of compassion, community, and the power of doing the right thing. And for Kevin, it was just the beginning of a journey that would shape not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. Seeds of change. The bond between Kevin and Mr. Whitmore continued to grow in the weeks that followed. Kevin's visits became a regular occurrence, filling the once empty halls of the Whitmore mansion with laughter and life. For Mr. Whitmore, these visits were more than just a break from his solitude. They were a reminder that human connection still held value, even after years of shutting himself away. For Kevin, the old man's stories became a source of inspiration. Mr. Whitmore had seen the world in ways Kevin could only dream of, and every tale he shared, of distant lands, business triumphs, and the deep love he had shared with Margaret, was a window into a life rich with experience. One breezy Saturday afternoon, Kevin arrived at the mansion carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper. He had saved up for weeks to buy the gift and couldn't wait to see Mr. Whitmore's reaction. As always, the gates opened with a groan, and Mr. Whitmore greeted him at the door. The old man's face lit up when he saw Kevin, his usually stern expression softening into a smile. "What's this?" Mr. Whitmore asked, eyeing the box curiously. Kevin grinned as he handed it over. "Just something I thought you might like, sir." Mr. Whitmore opened the package carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a leather-bound journal with crisp, blank pages and an inscription on the inside cover that read, "For Mr. Whitmore, so your stories never fade." The old man ran his fingers over the smooth cover, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Kevin," he said softly, "this is thoughtful. Thank you. I figured you have so many great stories," Kevin said, scratching the back of his neck. "It'd be a shame if they weren't written down. You know, for others to read someday." Mr. Whitmore chuckled, a deep, warm sound that seemed to echo through the room. "You think anyone would want to read the ramblings of an old man?" "I know they would," Kevin replied earnestly. "You've lived an amazing life, Mr. Whitmore. People could learn a lot from you." The old man sat down in his favorite armchair, turning the journal over in his hands. For a moment, he said nothing, lost in thought. Then he looked up at Kevin, a glint of determination in his eyes. "Maybe you're right," he said finally. "Maybe it's time to stop hiding and start sharing." True to his word, Mr. Whitmore began filling the pages of the journal with stories from his life. Kevin often sat with him as he wrote, sometimes offering prompts or asking questions to keep the memories flowing. The process seemed to energize Mr. Whitmore, giving him a renewed sense of purpose. Word of Kevin's visits to the Whitmore mansion spread throughout the neighborhood, sparking curiosity among the locals. People who had once viewed the old man as an eccentric recluse began to see him in a new light. One day, while Kevin was helping Mr. Whitmore organize his study, there was an unexpected knock at the door. Mr. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he muttered as he made his way to the front entrance. Kevin followed, curious to see who it was. When the door opened, they were greeted by a group of neighbors holding homemade pies, fresh flowers, and handwritten cards. At the front of the group was Mrs. Jenkins, a sprightly woman in her 60s who lived 3 houses down. "We heard about the good deed young Kevin did," Mrs. Jenkins said with a warm smile. "And we thought it was about time we stopped by to check on you, Mr. Whitmore." The old man blinked, momentarily stunned. For years, he had kept himself isolated, convinced that no one cared about his presence. Yet here were his neighbors, standing on his porch with gestures of kindness that he hadn't expected. "Well, Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Thank you. Please, come in." The once quiet mansion buzzed with life that afternoon as the neighbors filled the study, sharing stories and laughter over tea and cookies. Mr. Whitmore, though initially reserved, slowly warmed up to the group, even cracking a few jokes that had everyone in stitches. Kevin watched the scene unfold with a sense of pride. He hadn't expected his decision to return the wallet to ripple out this far, but seeing the community come together was proof that small acts of kindness could create profound change. As the weeks turned into months, the Whitmore mansion transformed. What had once been a lonely, neglected house now became a hub of activity. Neighbors came by regularly to visit Mr. Whitmore, who had started hosting weekly gatherings in his garden. Kevin often helped him prepare for these events, setting up chairs and tables, and sometimes even baking cookies with his mom's help. One sunny afternoon, as Kevin and Mr. Whitmore sat on the porch watching the garden party unfold, the old man turned to the boy with a serious expression. "Kevin," he said, "I want to do something for this community. Something lasting." Kevin tilted his head, intrigued. "What do you mean, sir?" Mr. Whitmore gestured toward the garden. where children played and adults chatted. "Look at these people," he said. "They'd been good to me, and I want to give back. I've been thinking about turning this old place into something meaningful, maybe a community center or a library." Kevin's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. You have so much space here, and I bet people would love it." Mr. Whitmore nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Of course, I'd need help to make it happen, and I can't think of anyone better to help me than you." "Me?" Kevin asked, his voice rising in surprise. "But I'm just a kid." "You're more than that, Kevin," Mr. Whitmore said firmly. "You're the reason I'm even thinking about this. Your kindness reminded me of the good in people. I'd like you to be a part of this, every step of the way." Kevin swallowed hard, the weight of Mr. Whitmore's words sinking in. He felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. But most of all, he felt honored. "I'd be happy to help," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever you need." Over the next few months, Kevin and Mr. Whitmore worked tirelessly to bring the old man's vision to life. They reached out to local contractors, organized fundraisers, and rallied the community to pitch in. The transformation of the Whitmore mansion became a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together. For Kevin, the experience was life-changing. He learned valuable lessons about leadership, teamwork, and the power of community. And through it all, his bond with Mr. Whitmore deepened, evolving from a chance connection into a profound friendship. The mansion's grand reopening as the Whitmore Community Center was a day to remember. The entire neighborhood gathered to celebrate, marveling at the building's transformation. The once lonely house now buzzed with life, its rooms filled with books, art supplies, and spaces for people to connect and create. As Kevin stood beside Mr. Whitmore during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. What had started with a lost wallet had grown into something far greater than he could have imagined. It wasn't just about one act of kindness. It was about the chain reaction it had set in motion. And as the community center's doors opened to welcome its first visitors, Kevin knew this was only the beginning of an incredible journey. New beginnings and old secrets. The Whitmore Community Center became the heart of the neighborhood in a matter of weeks. From morning yoga classes for seniors to after-school programs for kids, the building was alive with activity. Mr. Whitmore, who had spent years isolated in his grand mansion, now thrived in his new role as a community leader. And by his side was Kevin, whose presence and energy had become integral to the center's operations. Kevin took pride in his contributions, balancing his time between school, work, and the center. Every evening, he would walk home with a sense of fulfillment, knowing he was making a difference. But despite the progress they had made, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Mr. Whitmore's story than he had shared. One rainy afternoon, as Kevin helped Mr. Whitmore organize an old storage room in the community center, he stumbled upon a dusty trunk hidden behind stacks of boxes. It was large and weathered, with rusted metal hinges and a thick layer of cobwebs. "What's this?" Kevin asked, brushing away the dust. Mr. Whitmore, who had been sorting through books nearby, turned at the sound of Kevin's voice. His expression shifted as he saw the trunk, a mix of surprise, nostalgia, and something else Kevin couldn't quite place. "Ah," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice tinged with emotion. "I haven't seen that in years." Kevin crouched down and examined the trunk more closely. "Do you want me to open it?" The old man hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Go ahead." Kevin unlatched the trunk carefully, the metal creaking as he lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of items that seemed to span decades: black and white photographs, letters in faded envelopes, and a neatly folded military uniform. Kevin picked up one of the photographs and held it up to the light. It showed a young Mr. Whitmore in uniform, standing beside a woman with auburn hair and green eyes. "Margaret, you were in the military?" Kevin asked, his voice filled with awe. Mr. Whitmore nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I served during the war. That's where I met Margaret." She was a nurse, stationed at the same base. We fell in love almost immediately. Kevin set the photograph down gently, sensing the weight of the memories tied to the trunk's contents. You must have been really brave. Mr. Whitmore chuckled softly. Brave, maybe. But mostly, I was lucky to survive and to find someone like Margaret. As Kevin continued to sort through the items, he came across a small locked box tucked into the corner of the trunk. He held it up, raising an eyebrow. What's in here? Mr. Whitmore's expression darkened slightly. He took the box from Kevin's hands and ran his fingers over its surface. That, he said slowly, contains something I've avoided looking at for a long time. Kevin hesitated. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. The old man sighed, setting the box down on a nearby table. No, Kevin. If I'd learned anything from you, it's that some things are worth confronting. This might be one of them. Mr. Whitmore retrieved a small key from a drawer and unlocked the box. Inside was a single letter, yellowed with age and sealed with a wax stamp. He picked it up carefully, as though it might crumble in his hands, and stared at it for a long moment. What is it? Kevin asked gently. It's a letter Margaret wrote to me during the war, Mr. Whitmore explained. She gave it to me the night before I was sent into combat. She told me not to open it unless I didn't come back. Kevin's eyes widened. But you did come back. I did, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice heavy with emotion. And I couldn't bring myself to open it. I thought it would feel like tempting fate, like inviting bad luck. But now, maybe it's time. With trembling hands, Mr. Whitmore broke the seal and unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the page, and as he read, tears filled his eyes. Kevin stayed silent, giving the old man space to process whatever emotions the letter had stirred. After a few moments, Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat and looked up at Kevin. She wrote about her hopes for our future, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She wanted us to build a life full of love and kindness. She believed in the power of giving back, of leaving the world better than we found it. Kevin nodded, his own chest tightening with emotion. You're doing that now, Mr. Whitmore. The community center. It's exactly what she would have wanted. The old man smiled, a tear rolling down his cheek. You're right, Kevin. And it's thanks to you. Meeting you reminded me of the man I used to be, the man Margaret believed in. I owe you more than I can ever express. As the weeks went on, the community center continued to thrive, and Mr. Whitmore seemed more at peace than ever. He started sharing Margaret's story with the community, using her words as inspiration for workshops and events. Her letter became a symbol of the center's mission, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple out and create something beautiful. One day, during a neighborhood gathering at the center, Mr. Whitmore stood up to address the crowd. Kevin watched from the back of the room, feeling a swell of pride as the old man spoke. This center is not just a building, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice steady and strong. It's a testament to the power of connection and the importance of community. And it wouldn't exist without one young man's honesty and courage. Kevin Parker, would you come up here? The crowd turned to look at Kevin, who blushed deeply but made his way to the front. Mr. Whitmore placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled. Kevin reminded me that no matter how far we stray, it's never too late to do the right thing. He's the reason I found the strength to open my heart and this center. So, thank you, Kevin, for everything. The room erupted into applause, and Kevin felt his eyes sting with tears. He had never expected any of this when he picked up that wallet on the sidewalk, but now he couldn't imagine his life any other way. As the evening wound down, Kevin and Mr. Whitmore stood together in the garden, watching the sunset. The old man placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder and said, "You've got a bright future ahead of you, Kevin, and I'm going to make sure you have every opportunity to succeed." Kevin looked up at Mr. Whitmore, his heart full. "Thank you, sir, for believing in me." Mr. Whitmore nodded, his eyes twinkling. "No, Kevin, thank you for reminding me how to believe in myself. A legacy of light. The Whitmore Community Center had become more than just a hub for the neighborhood. It was a beacon of hope. Families gathered for events, students found quiet corners to study, and people who had once passed each other on the street without a word now shared stories and laughter. The transformation was nothing short of extraordinary, and at its heart were two unlikely partners, Kevin Parker and Harold Whitmore. But even amidst the joy and progress, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that his journey with Mr. Whitmore was leading to something bigger. The old man had spent decades in solitude, and though he now seemed invigorated by his new role in the community, Kevin sensed there was still a weight Mr. Whitmore carried, a shadow that hadn't fully lifted. One crisp autumn morning, Kevin arrived at the community center to find Mr. Whitmore sitting on the porch, a large envelope in his lap. His face was thoughtful, his gaze fixed on the golden leaves swirling in the wind. "Morning, Mr. Whitmore," Kevin said cheerfully, setting down his backpack. "What's that you've got there?" The old man looked up, his blue eyes soft but serious. "Kevin, there's something I need to talk to you about." Kevin's smile faded as he took a seat beside Mr. Whitmore. "What's going on?" Mr. Whitmore held up the envelope. "This is my will," he said plainly. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next, not just for me, but for this community, for you." Kevin's heart sank at the implication. "Mr. Whitmore, you're not." "I'm not dying, Kevin," the old man interrupted, a small smile tugging at his lips. "At least not anytime soon, as far as I know. But life is unpredictable, and I want to make sure everything I've worked for, everything we've built, lives on." Kevin exhaled, relief washing over him. "Okay," he said cautiously. "So what's the plan?" Mr. Whitmore opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. "I've made arrangements to ensure the community center stays open, no matter what happens to me. There's a trust in place, funded by my estate, to cover its expenses for years to come." Kevin's eyes widened. "That's amazing, Mr. Whitmore." "There's more," the old man said, his tone shifting to something even more serious. He pulled out a smaller envelope and handed it to Kevin. "This is for you." Kevin hesitated, then opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a set of keys. His brow furrowed as he looked at Mr. Whitmore. "What's this?" "The letter explains everything," Mr. Whitmore said. "But the short version is, I'm naming you as the executor of my estate. You'll oversee the trust and ensure the center continues to thrive." Kevin's jaw dropped. "Me? But I'm just a kid. I don't know the first thing about running an estate." Mr. Whitmore chuckled. "You're not just a kid, Kevin. You're the most capable, honest person I know, and you won't be doing it alone. I've set up a team of advisors to guide you. All you need to do is lead with the same integrity and kindness you've shown me." Kevin stared at the keys in his hand, his mind racing. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the trust Mr. Whitmore was placing in him. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say you'll think about it," Mr. Whitmore said with a wink, "and read the letter when you're ready. No rush." That evening, Kevin sat in his room, the letter spread out on his desk. Mr. Whitmore's neat handwriting filled the page, every word carefully chosen. "Dear Kevin, if you're reading this, it means I've decided to put my faith in you. And I have no doubt it's the right choice. When you first knocked on my door with my wallet in hand, I saw in you a rare quality. The courage to do what's right, even when it's not easy. That courage has inspired me to make changes I never thought possible. The community center is just the beginning. My dream is for it to be a place where people feel safe, valued, and connected. You've already shown me that you have the heart and vision to carry that dream forward. I trust you to ensure it thrives, not for my sake, but for the sake of everyone it serves. You've given me more than you realize, Kevin. You've given me hope, purpose, and a legacy to leave behind. For that, I am forever grateful. With all my heart, thank you. Harold Whitmore." Kevin read the letter twice, then a third time, his emotions swirling. Mr. Whitmore believed in him in a way no one else ever had, not even Kevin himself. The weight of the responsibility felt overwhelming, but it was also a challenge he couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, Kevin and Mr. Whitmore worked closely to prepare for the future. Kevin learned about the trust, the center's finances, and the team of advisors Mr. Whitmore had assembled. The old man took every opportunity to mentor Kevin, sharing not just practical knowledge but life lessons about resilience, leadership, and the importance of staying true to one's values. The community noticed the change in Kevin. His teachers at school remarked on his newfound confidence, and his friends teased him about being the boss of the block. But Kevin didn't let the attention go to his head. He knew the real work was just beginning. One chilly December morning, Kevin arrived at the community center to find a large crowd gathered outside. Banners hung from the building's facade, and the air buzzed with excitement. "What's going on?" Kevin asked as he pushed through the crowd. Inside, he found Mr. Whitmore standing at the front of the main hall, addressing the crowd with a beaming smile. When he spotted Kevin, he gestured for him to come forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice ringing out clearly, "I'd like to introduce you to someone very special. Kevin Parker is not only the reason this center exists, he's the reason I found the strength to rebuild my life. Today, I want to honor him for everything he's done." The crowd erupted into applause as Mr. Whitmore pulled a cloth off a nearby easel, revealing a plaque engraved with Kevin's name and a quote, "Integrity and kindness can change the world." Kevin's throat tightened as he stepped forward, his heart pounding. He looked out at the faces of his neighbors, his friends, and his mother, who stood in the front row with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Kevin said, his voice shaking. "Thank you for believing in me. I never thought returning a wallet could lead to something like this, but I'm so glad it did. This community means everything to me, and I promise to do my best to keep making it better." The applause was deafening, and as Kevin stood beside Mr. Whitmore, he realized something profound. The old man had given him more than trust. He had given him purpose, and together they had built something that would endure long after them both. Years later, Kevin would look back on that moment as the start of a new chapter in his life. The community center flourished under his leadership, becoming a model for other neighborhoods. Mr. Whitmore's legacy lived on, not just in the center's walls, but in the lives it touched. And for Kevin, it was a reminder that one small act of kindness could indeed change the world. The future they built. Years passed, and the Whitmore Community Center thrived, growing beyond what anyone could have imagined. It became not just a hub for local residents, but a landmark in the city, known for its inclusive programs, innovative workshops, and the sense of belonging it fostered. Kevin Parker, now in his late 20s, stood at the heart of it all. A leader, a mentor, and a symbol of the transformative power of integrity. The center was bustling on a sunny Saturday morning as Kevin made his rounds, greeting familiar faces and checking on the various activities happening that day. In one room, a group of children painted murals under the guidance of a local artist. In another, seniors shared laughter and stories over coffee and chess. The air buzzed with life, and Kevin felt a deep sense of pride. This was what he and Mr. Whitmore had dreamed of. Kevin paused at the entrance to the main hall, his eyes drawn to the large plaque mounted on the wall. It bore Mr. Whitmore's name alongside Margaret's, with the inscription, "In memory of Harold and Margaret Whitmore, whose vision and generosity continue to inspire us all." He smiled, the familiar ache of missing Mr. Whitmore tugging at his chest. The old man had passed away 5 years earlier, peacefully in his sleep. Kevin had been by his side, holding his hand and promising to carry on his legacy. It was a promise he had kept. Later that day, Kevin sat in his modest office, reviewing plans for the center's expansion. The demand for their programs had grown so much that they were planning to open a second location on the other side of the city. It was a daunting project, but Kevin was determined to make it a success. As he worked, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," he called, looking up from his desk. The door opened to reveal a young woman, probably no older than 16, with a shy smile and a bundle of papers in her hands. Kevin recognized her immediately. Jasmine, one of the center's most promising students. "Hey, Jasmine," Kevin said warmly. "What's up?" "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice soft. "For the scholarship." Kevin leaned back in his chair, smiling. The center had recently started a scholarship program for students pursuing higher education, funded in part by the trust Mr. Whitmore had established. Jasmine was one of the first recipients. "You earned it," Kevin said. "Your essays were incredible, and your grades speak for themselves. I'm just glad we could help." Jasmine hesitated, then stepped forward and placed a letter on Kevin's desk. "I wanted to give you this. It's a thank you letter. But it's also about what this place means to me." Kevin picked up the letter, his curiosity piqued. "Thank you, Jasmine. I'll read it right away." As Jasmine left, Kevin unfolded the letter and began to read. Her words were heartfelt and raw, describing how the center had given her a safe space, mentors who believed in her, and the confidence to dream big. Kevin felt his chest tighten as he read her closing line. "Because of you and this center, I believe I can be someone who makes a difference, just like you did." That evening, Kevin walked through the empty halls of the community center, reflecting on Jasmine's words. He paused in the study, the very room where Mr. Whitmore had first shared his stories. The shelves were now lined with books donated by the community, but the original leather-bound journal Kevin had given Mr. Whitmore still sat in its place of honor. Kevin picked it up, running his fingers over the worn cover. Flipping through the pages, he found an entry that made him pause. It was one of the last Mr. Whitmore had written, dated just weeks before his passing. "Kevin reminds me of Margaret. He has her kindness, her determination to make the world a better place. I believe he's capable of more than even he realizes. If this center lives on, it will be because of him. And if it grows into something even greater, it will be because he saw possibilities where I did not. I couldn't have chosen a better person to carry on our dream." Kevin's vision blurred with tears as he closed the journal. He could almost hear Mr. Whitmore's voice, filled with the quiet confidence that had always steadied him. "I hope you're proud," Kevin said aloud, his voice breaking. "We're doing everything we can to make this place something Margaret would have loved." The years continued to pass, and the center expanded, opening branches in underserved neighborhoods and partnering with schools and nonprofits to offer even more opportunities. Kevin became a prominent figure in the city, known not just for his leadership, but for his ability to inspire others to believe in the power of community. One day, as he stood on the stage at a groundbreaking ceremony for the newest center location, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd, his mother. Mrs. Parker, now retired, waved at him proudly, her eyes shining with tears. She had been his rock through every challenge, and seeing her there reminded him of how far they had come. When it was his turn to speak, Kevin stepped up to the microphone, the audience falling silent. "I want to thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady. "This isn't just a building we're opening. It's a continuation of a dream that started years ago. A dream of creating a space where people could feel seen, supported, and valued." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "When I was a kid, I found a wallet on the street. Returning it to its owner didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but it set off a chain of events that changed my life. That wallet belonged to Mr. Harold Whitmore, a man who taught me that one small act of kindness can ripple out in ways you'd never expect." The crowd murmured in appreciation, and Kevin took a deep breath, his next words filled with emotion. "This center isn't just a tribute to Mr. Whitmore or his incredible generosity. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. It's a reminder that every choice we make, every small act of kindness, has the power to create something bigger than ourselves." The audience erupted into applause, and Kevin stepped back, his heart full. He knew that the work ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he also knew it would always be worth it. That night, as Kevin sat in his quiet apartment, he opened a notebook and began to write. Like Mr. Whitmore, he wanted to document the journey, to leave something behind for the next generation. As his pen moved across the page, he wrote the words that had guided him through it all. Integrity and kindness can change the world. And he knew, deep in his heart, that they already had.